It was 1989. Protests had erupted in Beijing against the Deng regime of China. Images of the protests and the government's response were splashed across TV screens and newspapers around the globe. The world was fully captivated by this momentous event, and its images have remained some of the most iconic in history. It was this intense and sustained coverage that appeared as an opportunity to others. The same year as Tiananmen Square, a prominent Israeli politician, Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu, who had just served as Israel's representative to the United Nations, was speaking to students at Bar Ilan University, where he was quoted as saying, "Israel should have exploited the repression of the demonstrations in China, when world attention focused on that country, to carry out mass expulsions among the Arabs of the territories. Regrettably, there was no support for this policy." But that's not entirely correct. Perhaps it was not popular mainstream sentiment at the time, but there were some Israelis who sided with Netanyahu on this issue. In 1981, a Dr. Baruch Goldstein penned a letter to the editors of the New York Times. Israel must act decisively to remove the Arab minority from within its borders. Years after writing this letter, Goldstein would don his Israeli military uniform and arm himself with his army-issued Galil automatic rifle. He'd then walk into the Ibrahimi Mosque in the old city of Hebron, located in the occupied West Bank. When worshippers bowed their heads to the floor during Islamic prayer, Goldstein unloaded magazine after magazine into the crowd, firing at anything that moved. Hundreds of people would be hit, and in the end, at least 29 were killed in the mosque that day. In Israel, as well as the Palestinian territories, the outrage over this atrocity was immense. It stalled peace talks and created civil unrest among Palestinians. Dozens more would be killed by Israeli forces in the ensuing protests. Many familiar with this event know that the killings themselves aren't the end of the story. Following the massacre, Clyde Haberman of the New York Times would report on the ground from Hebron at Baruch Goldstein's gravesite. The title of the article? "Hundreds of Jews Gather to Honor Hebron Killer." Haberman writes, "In a steady stream, they came by the hundreds today to the grave of Baruch Goldstein, many bowing deeply to kiss the tombstone of the Hebron mass killer and to proclaim him a holy man. Many journeyed here by car and bus. Whether young or old, they approached the burial mound, surrounded by stones placed in mourning, as though it were a shrine. Dozens hugged and kissed the tombstone. Some kneeled to kiss the grave itself, including one young man who cried out, 'Hero of Israel, hero of Israel, there should be more like him.'" Haberman continues, "While the Israelis who worship the Brooklyn-born Dr. Goldstein are a small minority, the numbers turning out today suggested that they may be more than the minuscule fraction the government claims. Indeed, the support appears to be beyond just nameless civilians. Dov Lior, the chief rabbi of the Kiryat Arba settlement of Hebron, where Baruch Goldstein lived, called him holier than all the martyrs of the Holocaust. The Jerusalem Post described Lior as one of the most high-profile national religious rabbis in the country. As a result of this mass shooting, the Israeli government outlawed the radical Kach party, of which Baruch Goldstein was a member. Another member was a young Itamar Ben-Gvir, who joined the party when he was just 16. He would go on to become the party's youth leader. Ben-Gvir remained politically active following the outlawing of Kach and is now famously the leader of the Otzma Yehudit, or Jewish Power Party. Otzma Yehudit is believed by Israelis to be the spiritual successor to the Kach party. Ben-Gvir has a colorful past filled with calls for ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. In fact, he was so radical in his politics that he was barred from conscription into the Israeli military. To underscore his devotion to extremism, Ben-Gvir hung a poster of Baruch Goldstein on the wall of his living room. He reportedly took it down in 2019. In an unsuccessful attempt to appease Naftali Bennett, who vetoed his inclusion into his right-wing coalition over the poster, it's not known whether he put it back up afterward. Of course, Ben-Gvir has now become the Minister of Security of the State of Israel, in what is Israel's most right-wing government, possibly in history. At the Otzma Yehudit campaign launch in 2019, Ben-Gvir thanked his spiritual mentor, none other than Dov Lior, and brought him on stage to resounding applause. As Minister of National Security, Ben-Gvir holds one of the most important positions in Bibi Netanyahu's new cabinet. Ben-Gvir has called for harsher crackdowns on Palestinian militants and their supporters, as well as strict curfews in Palestinian villages, and mass deportations and targeted killings of terrorism suspects. Ben-Gvir would also like to authorize a shoot-to-kill policy for Palestinians who throw stones at Israelis. In these beliefs, he's also joined by the new finance minister Bezalel Smotrich. Smotrich, leader of the religious Zionist Party, is no stranger to controversy himself. In 2021, he told Arab lawmakers in the Knesset that they are in Israel by mistake because founder of Israel David Ben-Gurion didn't, quote, finish the job when expelling the Arabs.
אני איתכם לא מדבר, אנטי-ציונים, תומכי טרור, אויבים. אתם פה בטעות, כי בן גוריון לא גמר את העבודה ולא זרק אתכם ב-48.
Smotrich and Ben-Gvir will enjoy free reign under Prime Minister Netanyahu, back as premier after a less than 2-year hiatus. As a result, we'll surely be seeing harsher treatment of Palestinians. And what's looking increasingly likely is the outright annexation of the occupied West Bank. Smotrich is insisting that the civil administration of the West Bank be transferred to his finance ministry, a move that is seen by many to be de facto annexation already. By taking the civil administration of the West Bank out of the hands of the military and into civilian control, it will be administered by the federal government of Israel. On top of that, the border police operations of the West Bank will be relinquished to the newly named National Security Ministry, which will in fact be headed by Itamar Ben-Gvir. Along with expanding settlements and annexing the West Bank, Benjamin Netanyahu's history of steady invasions and saturation bombings of Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, will have to be closely watched, and I strongly advise everyone watching this now to prepare for this likely scenario, and to diligently update yourselves on news coming out of Gaza. Remember at the beginning of this video when I read you that Bibi quote saying that he wishes he'd used the Tiananmen Square massacre as an opportunity to expel Arabs from the occupied territories? Be wary of this pattern in the future. Like in 2014, when Bibi launched a ground invasion on the same exact day that Malaysia Flight 17 was shot out of the sky over Ukraine. The moments when news events spike media coverage and drown out other stories is precisely the time that we should be looking into Gaza and the West Bank. I need your help. This channel relies on donations and patrons. YouTube hardly monetizes my videos. I am humbly asking those who have the means to consider giving me a donation. I have a link for donations in the description right now. Also, you should absolutely join my Patreon, which is also in the description. The cheapest option is just $1, and you get full access to exclusive content and my Discord server, where everyone is very cool and we talk about video ideas all the time. And if you have the means to do so, please consider donating, be it $5, $10, or more, whatever you can afford, and if you can't, please don't do it. If you can, it would be an enormous help, and I'd be forever grateful. Thank you so much to my patrons, I love you all, and I'll see you for my next video.